Shadow of the Erdtree is fast approaching, so I'm going to be doing a short series here updating some of my old builds based on all the buffs and nerfs that we've seen to Elden Ring since launch. The Frost Mage and really my Mage Knight builds are first, and now I've combined these two builds to make a maximum damage output intelligence build perfect to take into the DLC. Let's go! Let me know what other builds you'd like to see in the comments down below. So what's changed since launch? The original two builds that this is, it's a hybrid of my Mage Knight and my Frost Mage. The Mage Knight used the Moonveil Katana and lent into the insane poise damage of Transient Moonlight, which has had a couple of little changes, like in patch 1.8, the poise damage of the actual weapon slash part of it was increased, but the poise damage of the magic wave was actually reduced. Now this means that if you want to get those same benefits, you have to be significantly closer to your enemies. I also wanted to change this build a little bit and lean into the Dark Moon Greatsword from the Frost Mage build, because in general, Greatswords have had some pretty significant buffs since launch. Like in patch 1.09, the scaling was changed, but also they have had their speed, their range, their recovery time, the guard counter speed of Greatsword weapons have been increased. And in patch 1.7, the Moonlight Greatsword's Ash of War was actually buffed as well. So the stamina consumption of the strong and charge attacks has been reduced. The damage detection on the weapon part has been added, so you can actually hit them with the weapon as well as the wave. And in 1.4, it actually had its FP consumption reduced, as well as having its cast speed increased and its decreased recovery time. And the frostbite build-up was also increased as well. On top of that, a lot of ice spells that we were using in that Frost Mage build have actually been changed as well to increase their frostbite build-up in patch 1.7 and their FP cost. Basically across the board, a lot of spells have had their FP cost reduced in that same patch. So essentially, all this comes together to mean that the Dark Moon Greatsword has been brought much more in line with the Moonveil Katana, and the extra frostbite benefits of this weapon really help this build. You can still use the Moonveil Katana if you want to, or even the Zamor curved sword, which is a curved greatsword. Different animations, but still has like that frostbite effect on it. So you've got some options there, but focusing on this build specifically with the Dark Moon Greatsword, we are leaning into Frostbite here for a couple of reasons, right? Frostbite is a pretty easy status to get off, and you can actually reset it, which is why we've added a Hornbow and the Flame Pots as secondary options for this build. So when you trigger Frostbite on an enemy, you do get that chunk of health that it does rip off, but then you can reset that with, say, the Hornbow, which does scale with intelligence, and you can do magic damage with it, but by using Flame Arrows or just by using Flame Pots, dealing that flame damage will reset their frostbite like build up, and then you can work on that build up again, which is really good to do on enemies that have, you know, high health pools, or even that have frostbite resistance, which there is a fair few throughout. We are obviously using a lot of spells here that also gain frostbite, which we'll talk about those in a little bit. For your stats here, intelligence is absolutely your primary. You want to get this to around 80. Now, this is also for using the specific staff we're using, as well as all the spells we're using, but also because the magic wave of the Dark Moon Greatsword does scale mostly off your intelligence. Same with the weapon itself. For your secondary stats here, like mind, you definitely want your vigor to be around the 50 mark for moving into the DLC, and then your endurance at whatever, and your strength at 16 just for that minimum requirement. For your equipment here, I'm using the Carriol Regan Scepter, which is Renala's Remembrance staff that you can get there, and the Dark Moon Greatsword does come from Rani's questline. We're not using a shield here, but I would put the Hornbow in your secondary slot. Now this comes from near the Sophria River bank side of Grace, just underneath the stairs at the Hallowed Grounds. Now, what you can do with this weapon is essentially just switch to it in your main hand and then use the Flame Arrow anytime you want to actually reset the Frostbite effect. You can use Flame Pots if you don't want to switch weapons. It does help either way, but I also just like the versatility of having another option here. And you can use arrows that have other effects, right? Like, let's say you want to sleep enemies or just do magic damage or what have you. It does give you that option, and it scales perfectly with this build. For the armor, I'm wearing the Snow Witch hat, which comes from Renna's Rise, also from Rani's questline. And then any medium armor that you have a decent amount of poise with, I am wearing Blade Set here because it does give me above 52 poise, so I can tank a couple of hits while still attacking. Talismans, I'm using the Shard of Alexander to greatly boost the attack power of skills. I'm using the Magic Scorpion Charm to raise the magic attack damage, because we will do a lot of magic attack damage. It does lower your damage negation, but we can mitigate some of those effects with the Dragon Crest Great Shield Talisman to increase our physical damage negation. And then lastly, I've got the Godfrey Icon to to enhance the charge spells and skills, as a lot of these spells can actually be charged, so you can increase their damage overall. If you don't want the additional damage you take from the Magic Scorpion charm, you can switch that out to the Carrion Filigree Crest, which will then lower the FP cost of your magic wave that you can do, but it's just something to point out as an alternative. For our Ash of War and spells, we've already talked about the Moonlight Greatsword skill that we're essentially using here. You need to trigger this with your L2 and then you cast it as like a charged attack, and the wave will then shoot out from that. You can charge this up as we've talked about, and you want to sort of weave this in with your attacks or any sort of other spells, right? Like the spells we're using here are Undula's Moonblade, Glintstone Iceberg, which is essentially like your Glintstone Pebble sort of attacks, but it does have Frostbite build-up, which actually had its Frostbite build-up increased in 1.07 as well. Greatblade Phalanx is a massive spell to use for this build because of the poise damage and stance damage that essentially does, right? You can cast this and then build up your Moonlight Greatsword charged attacks here to stagger enemies pretty rapidly using that combo. And then Rani's Dark Moon is also great here, not only for the damage that it does, but it also lowers the target's magic damage negation. So all your magic damage that we're doing in this build will increase, and it is a spell that did get buffed in a lot of these matches as well. So bringing this together for some tips, right? A common theme you'll see throughout this new build series to prepare for the DLC is we're leaning a lot into status effects and stance breaking, as we have really no idea what the enemies will be like in the DLC. One thing that we can guarantee though is that they will take a ton of damage from status effects like every other enemy in Elden Ring, because status damage, when you see that like pop effect, it's calculated based on the total HP of the target rather than your attack power. So it's why those effects always seem quite large and damaging, and that's always going to be consistent unless, you know, the DLC makes a massive sweeping change to Elden Ring, which I don't think it necessarily will. You'll still get those benefits from, say, Frostbite, like leaning into this magic-based intelligence build. Now, in terms of your physique flask here, you can definitely run the tiers that buff your magic damage as well as your charged attacks. You want to pop this like right at the start of your combat encounters so you can get the maximum benefits. Your Great Rune should be something you should think about for the DLC as well. Radahn's Great Rune can increase your overall HP, FP, and stamina, all that good stuff. And then Godric's just increases your overall attributes. Both of these are fine. Either one you can really run. I do like Radahn's a little bit better because those percentages are a little bit higher, but it just depends on where you're at in the game and sort of what sort of works for you. But essentially either of these are fine to take into the DLC. You can buy fire arrows in Caelid from a nomadic merchant here in the Caelid area. You can go there and just buy an unlimited amount of fire arrows to take into the DLC with you. And essentially the general play here is you want to cast the Moonlight Greatsword and then Greatblade Phalanx, so you've got that set up, and then you can use your Physic Flask in those encounters as well. Build up that charged Moon Wave attack and then allow that to hit your enemies, allow the Greatblade Phalanx to deal that stance damage, build up that Frostbite status, have it trigger on the enemy, reset it then with your Hornbow Flame Arrows or just with your Flame Pots, and then rinse, repeat that setup. And then you've got those different spells you can use as well for different scenarios, right? Like in some cases using Undula's Moonblade if you don't want to use the Greatsword for those sort of attacks. I do actually like, and I think I forgot to mention it earlier, Zamo's Ice Storm. It's a spell that is an AoE that does Frostbite. It's really good in scenarios where there's lots of enemies around you. If you can get this off, because it sort of staggers them when they take damage from it, can prevent you from getting surrounded. And if you charge this up, because it can be charged, it will linger a little bit longer and last a bit longer. Plus it does decent Frostbite damage as well, which was increased in patch 1.07 as well. So you've got that option as an alternative as spells. And you can use any spell you want to use, right? But just for the theme of this Moonlight Magus build, it definitely fits better if we're using a lot of these Frostbite spells and building up the cold sorceries, which benefit from the hat that we're wearing as well as this overall setup. But let me know your thoughts on this build in the comments down below, and what other builds you'd like me to update and make. I've got plenty in the works just as we get closer to the Elden Ring DLC. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Thank you to our members for supporting the channel. My name is NorZZa, and I hope you have a great day.